1 year after the Exodus, the largest search fleet in galactic history moved slowly through the dangerous regions beyond Council space. Admiral Nixvara commanded 300 ships from 12 different species, all following the faint energy. Traces that humanity had left behind. The trail led toward the galactic rim, into regions that Council scientists had declared uninhabitable due to massive gravitational anomalies and unstable star systems. The search had taken months of preparation, as Council engineers struggled to modify their ships for the harsh conditions ahead. The gravitational fields in the rim regions could tear apart vessels that were not properly shielded. Radiation levels were deadly to most species, and the strange energy storms that swept through the area could disable electronic systems without warning. It was the kind of environment that only humans had ever successfully navigated. Dr. Velinara traveled with the fleet as the chief science officer, carrying copies of everything that her former partner Dr. Pete Johnson had left behind. His research notes contained references to fold space technology that could explain how humans had managed to travel through such dangerous territory. The mathematics were beyond anything Council scientists had developed, but Velinara was beginning to understand that Johnson had been working on theories that could revolutionize space travel. The first sign that they were on the right track came from the automated beacon stations they discovered floating in empty space. The stations were clearly of human design, but they incorporated technologies that no Council engineer recognized. They broadcast simple navigation data in multiple languages, including several that were completely unknown to Council databases. The messages were friendly but clear. Authorized vessels could proceed. All others should turn back for their own safety. Engineer Zulafik worked frantically to analyze the beacon technology while the fleet waited at a safe distance. The power sources were unlike anything he had ever seen, generating massive amounts of energy from devices no larger than his fist. The construction materials appeared to be ordinary metals, but they had been treated with some kind of process that made them stronger than the best Council alloys. Everything about the beacons suggested that human technology had advanced far beyond what they had shown during their time in Council space. The fleet pressed deeper into the rim regions, following the beacon trail through asteroid fields and past dying stars. The gravitational anomalies grew stronger with each jump, forcing the ships to travel more slowly and carefully. Several vessels suffered damage from radiation exposure, and Admiral Nixvara was forced to send the weaker ships back to safer space. On the 70th day of the search, they encountered something that changed everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. Long-range sensors detected massive artificial structures orbiting a red giant star that should have been too unstable to support any kind of construction. The structures were enormous, dwarfing the largest space stations that Council engineers had ever built. They appeared to be cities in space, complete with parks and artificial gravity systems that could support millions of inhabitants. The fleet approached cautiously, expecting to find human colonies or research facilities. Instead, they discovered something far more significant. The cities were inhabited by dozens of different species, most of which were completely unknown to Council science. The architecture was beautiful and advanced, incorporating technologies that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Ships moved between the cities using propulsion systems that left no exhaust trails and generated no detectable energy signatures. When Admiral Nixvara attempted to establish communication with the cities, the response came from automated systems that spoke in perfect Council standard. The message was polite but firm. The region was under the protection of the Stellar Alliance, and unauthorized vessels were required to state their business or leave immediately. The fleet was being monitored by defensive systems that could disable their ships without causing permanent damage, but continued intrusion would result in forced escort back to Council space. Dr. Velinara convinced the Admiral to request a meeting with Alliance representatives. The response came within hours, and it carried shocking news. The Alliance had been aware of the Council for centuries, but had chosen not to make contact because they considered Council civilization to be too primitive and aggressive for productive interaction. The only reason they were willing to communicate now was because of their Relationship with humanity. The meeting took place aboard a neutral station that the Alliance constructed specifically for the encounter. The Alliance representatives were members of species that had evolved far beyond anything in Council space. They possessed technologies that could manipulate matter at the molecular level, communicate across galactic distances instantly, and travel between stars in ways that seemed to violate basic physics. The Alliance spokesman, a being that called itself Ambassador Theron, explained that humanity had made contact with them 2 years before the Exodus. Initial communication had been established when human deep space explorers encountered an Alliance research vessel studying the galactic rim phenomena. The humans had impressed the Alliance with their adaptability, curiosity, and problem-solving abilities, unlike the Council species, which had remained relatively static for millennia. Humans showed the kind of rapid development and innovative thinking that the Alliance valued. Within months of first contact, human scientists were contributing new ideas to Alliance research projects. Human engineers were finding solutions to problems that had puzzled Alliance experts for decades. Most importantly, humans demonstrated the kind of cooperative spirit that made them ideal partners for a truly advanced civilization. Ambassador Theron revealed that the Council's treatment of humanity had been carefully observed by Alliance monitoring systems. The deliberate restrictions on human expansion, the attempts to limit human access to advanced technologies, and the political manipulation designed to keep humanity in a subordinate position had convinced the Alliance that the Council was not ready for contact with truly advanced civilizations. The Alliance had offered humanity a choice: remain with the Council and accept limited development, or join the Alliance and realize their full potential. The decision had been unanimous among human leadership. Every human colony, every human ship, and every human citizen had voted to accept Alliance partnership and leave Council space forever. The Exodus had been accomplished using Alliance transportation technology that could move entire populations across galactic distances in a matter of days. The careful planning and coordination that had puzzled Council investigators was the result of Alliance guidance and support. Humanity had not simply disappeared, they had graduated to a level of civilization that the Council could not understand or reach. Ambassador Theron's final revelation was the most devastating. The Alliance controlled vast regions of space beyond the galactic rim, home to hundreds of advanced species that had evolved beyond the need for territorial expansion or resource competition. Humanity had been welcomed into this community as equals, not as junior partners or subjects to be managed. They were already contributing to Alliance projects that spanned multiple galaxies and involved technologies that could reshape the fundamental nature of reality itself. 18 months after humanity's departure, the galaxy was at war. The Zirithi Empire had launched their long-planned offensive against the weakened Council worlds, and without human military expertise, the defensive lines were crumbling faster than anyone had thought possible. The fortress worlds that Colonel Jake Martinez had designed to be impregnable were falling one by one as their complex defensive systems failed without proper maintenance. The attack had begun at dawn on the mining world of Kepler 186c, where human engineers had built automated defense platforms that could track and destroy incoming threats from 3 different star systems. The platforms had operated flawlessly for 5 years under human supervision, but in the months since the Exodus, their targeting systems had slowly drifted out of alignment. When the Zirithi fleet arrived, half the platforms fired at empty space, while the other half remained silent and useless. General Vorthak of the Kralian Dominion watched his forces retreat from their third failed defensive action in as many weeks. His military academy had taught him that defensive warfare relied on coordination, timing, and superior positioning. Colonel Martinez had designed defensive strategies that maximized all 3 advantages, but Vorthak was learning that executing those strategies required an understanding of human tactical thinking that he simply did not possess. The early warning networks were completely dark across 6 sectors. The sensor stations that Martinez had positioned throughout the border regions required constant recalibration to account for stellar drift and gravitational changes. human technicians had performed these adjustments automatically, treating them as routine maintenance that required no special documentation. Now the stations were blind to approaching fleets, and Zirithi forces were appearing without warning in systems that should have been protected back in Council space. Desperate attempts were being made to contact humanity through the Alliance representatives. Admiral Nix Vara had returned from the Rim regions with detailed recordings of his encounter with Ambassador Theron, but subsequent attempts to re-establish communication had been met with polite silence. The Alliance monitoring stations continued to broadcast their automated warnings about unauthorized travel, but no one responded to Council requests for assistance or negotiation. The economic collapse had accelerated beyond all projections as the war disrupted trade routes that were already failing. Worlds that had been wealthy were now struggling to feed their populations as supply chains broke down completely. The manufacturing centers that produced essential goods were operating at less than 10% capacity, and many had shut down entirely as their alien workers fled to safer regions. Engineer Zulthik made a disturbing discovery while analyzing the human technology that had been left behind on the Meridian. Captain Lisa Harper had not simply maintained the ship's systems. She had been constantly improving them with modifications that were so subtle they had gone unnoticed. The quantum drive that powered the vessel was actually 30% more efficient than its original design, but the improvements were integrated so seamlessly that they appeared to be part of the standard configuration. The implications were staggering. If humans had been making similar improvements to infrastructure across Council space, then the technology gap between human and alien capabilities was far larger than anyone had realized. The systems that were now failing might have been running on human innovations that other species had never understood or documented. Dr. Velinara's analysis of Pete Johnson's research files revealed the true scope of human scientific advancement. Johnson had not been working alone on his dimensional physics research. He had been part of a network of human scientists who were secretly collaborating on projects that pushed the boundaries of known science. The quantum field theories that had impressed Council academics were actually simplified versions of more advanced work that humans had been sharing only among themselves. The discovery explained how humans had been able to navigate the dangerous RIM regions and establish contact with the Alliance. Their ships had been equipped with experimental drives based on Johnson's research, technology that was generations ahead of anything the Council possessed. The humans had been testing faster-than-light travel methods that could cross galactic distances in days rather than months. Food shortages were becoming critical as the agricultural worlds continued to fail. Dr. Amy Stevens had left behind partial documentation for the atmospheric processors that maintained the farming colonies, but her notes were written in technical language that assumed knowledge of advanced chemistry and atmospheric engineering. Local technicians were struggling to understand systems that Stevens had designed to be largely automatic, requiring only periodic adjustment and maintenance. 3 major farming worlds had already been abandoned as their atmospheric processors failed completely. The populations had been evacuated to overcrowded refugee camps on other worlds, but the loss of agricultural capacity meant that food rationing was now mandatory across most of Council space. Billions of beings who had never known hunger were learning what it meant to be truly afraid for their survival. The Council made a desperate decision to broadcast messages directly toward Alliance space, offering humanity full membership with voting rights, territorial concessions, and technological partnerships that had been denied to them for decades. The messages were transmitted using the most powerful communication arrays in Council space, boosted by energy reserves that were desperately needed for other purposes. The response came not from humans, but from an Alliance vessel that appeared without warning in the heart of Council space. The ship was unlike anything in Council databases, constructed from materials that seemed to absorb light and energy rather than reflecting them. It took position near the Council headquarters on Nexus Prime and began broadcasting a message that was received simultaneously on every world in Council territory. The voice that spoke was calm and measured, identifying itself as representing the ethereal collective, one of the senior Alliance species. The message was brief but devastating in its implications. The humans were now under Alliance protection and were considered to be junior partners in a civilization that spanned multiple galaxies. The Council's attempts to re-establish contact were noted but not welcome. The ethereal spokesperson explained that Alliance monitoring of Council space had revealed the systematic mistreatment of humanity over several decades. The deliberate restrictions on human expansion, the attempts to limit their access to technology, and the political manipulation designed to maintain their subordinate status had convinced the Alliance that the Council was not ready for contact. With advanced civilizations, the Alliance had offered humanity a choice between remaining in Council space or joining a community of equals who valued innovation, cooperation, and mutual respect. The decision had been unanimous among human leadership, and there was no possibility of reversing it. The humans had found something better than anything the Council could offer, and they had no intention of returning to a situation where their potential was limited by the fears and prejudices of less advanced species. The message concluded with an offer of humanitarian aid for Council refugees, but no military assistance against the Zirathi Empire. The Alliance viewed the current conflict as a natural consequence of the Council's inability to maintain the systems that humans had created for them. If the Council wanted to survive, they would need to find their own solutions rather than depending on others to solve their problems. 2 years after humanity vanished from Council space, the once mighty galactic civilization was dying. Half of their worlds had fallen to the Zirathi Empire, and the remaining territories were isolated islands of desperation, surrounded by the growing darkness of war and economic collapse. The Grand Alliance that had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years was preparing to hold its final session in the damaged hulls of Nexus Prime. The communication arrays that had once connected hundreds of worlds now carried only scattered messages of defeat and retreat. Entire star systems had gone silent as their quantum relay stations failed one by one. The elaborate network of trade routes and diplomatic channels that had bound the galaxy together had become a collection of broken links and abandoned pathways. Admiral Nixvara stood before the assembled representatives, many of whom were attending the session through holographic projection because their worlds were either under siege or completely cut off from the communication network. His report was brief and devastating. The Zirathi Empire now controlled 60% of former Council territory and showed no signs of slowing their advance. The remaining defensive positions would likely fall within 6 months. The military collapse had been swift and complete once the Zirathi realized that human-designed defensive systems were failing across the border regions. Colonel Jake Martinez's carefully planned network of overlapping defenses had required constant coordination and adjustment to maintain its effectiveness. Without human tactical expertise, the system had become a collection of isolated strongpoints that could be defeated one at a time. General Vorthak reported that his forces had been reduced to fighting delaying actions as they retreated toward the core worlds. The sophisticated battle plans that human advisors had developed were useless without the flexible thinking and rapid adaptation that had made them effective. Kralian military doctrine emphasized honor and direct confrontation, but human strategies had relied on deception, misdirection, and the ability to change tactics quickly when circumstances shifted. The economic situation was beyond repair. Engineer Zuelthik had spent months trying to restore the manufacturing systems that Captain Lisa Harper had optimized during her service aboard the Meridian. He discovered that Harper had made thousands of small improvements to the ship's systems over several years, each one building on the previous modifications to create efficiencies that no alien engineer could duplicate. The ship that had once been the pride of the Council fleet was now barely functional, limping from system to system on failing engines and unreliable life support. Food production had collapsed completely on 7 worlds as the atmospheric processors, designed by Dr. Amy Stevens, finally broke down beyond repair. The technical manuals that Stevens had left behind were written in language that assumed knowledge of advanced chemistry and atmospheric engineering that no Council scientist possessed. Billions of refugees from the failed agricultural worlds were crowding into emergency Camps on planets that could barely feed their own populations. Dr. Velanara had made one final breakthrough while analyzing the files that her former partner Dr. Pete Johnson had left behind. Hidden in the mathematical equations that described his dimensional physics research, she found evidence that humans had been working on technologies that could revolutionize not just space travel but the fundamental nature of matter and energy. Johnson's theories suggested possibilities for unlimited clean energy, instantaneous transportation across galactic distances, and manufacturing techniques that could create any material from basic elements. The realization was bitter and devastating. Humans had been on the verge of sharing discoveries that could have transformed Council civilization and eliminated scarcity forever. Instead of recognizing and supporting this potential, the Council had treated humanity as a resource to be managed and controlled. They had lost not just a member species but the key to advancing beyond their current limitations. The final message from humanity arrived during the emergency session, transmitted through the same networks that the Ethereal Collective had used months earlier. The signal was so strong and clear that it overrode all other communications, forcing every representative to listen whether they wanted to or not. The voice that spoke was unmistakably human, calm, and professional, but carrying an undertone of sadness that made the words even more devastating. Director Karen Walsh identified herself as speaking on behalf of the Human Colonial Federation, a name that none of the Council representatives had heard before. Her message began with an acknowledgement that the Council's offers of partnership and reparations had been received and carefully considered by human leadership and their alliance partners. The discussions had been thorough and included input from every human colony and settlement in Alliance space. Walsh explained that humanity had spent 2 years learning what it meant to be treated as equals rather than subjects. Alliance partners shared their knowledge freely, encouraged human innovation, and provided support for projects that pushed the boundaries of science and exploration. Human colonies in Alliance space were thriving beyond anything they had achieved during their time with the Council. Children were growing up with access to educational opportunities that could prepare them for careers spanning multiple galaxies. The contrast with their former situation was stark and undeniable. During their time with the Council, humans had been restricted to marginal worlds and limited expansion zones. Their research had been monitored and controlled to prevent them from developing technologies that might challenge the established order. Their diplomatic status had been that of junior partners who were expected to be grateful for whatever opportunities they were given. Walsh's voice remained steady as she delivered the final verdict. The Human Colonial Federation had voted unanimously to decline all Council offers of renewed partnership. The betrayal of trust had been too complete and the damage too severe for any reconciliation to be possible. Humanity had found something better than anything the Council could offer, and they had no interest in returning to a relationship based on inequality and control. The message continued with information that made the Council's situation even more hopeless. Alliance monitoring stations had detected the Zirithi offensive and analyzed the military situation in Council space. The Alliance possessed technologies that could end the war instantly, but such assistance would require a level of trust and cooperation that the Council had proven itself incapable of maintaining. The offer of humanitarian aid for refugees remained open, but no military intervention would be forthcoming. Walsh concluded with words that would be remembered as the final epitaph for galactic civilization as the Council had known it. She wished them well in finding their own solutions to the challenges they faced, but noted that those solutions would need to come from within rather than depending on others to solve their problems. Humanity had learned to thrive without the Council, and the Council would need to learn to survive without humanity. The transmission ended with sensor data showing the scope of human expansion in Alliance space. Massive construction projects, spanning entire star systems, thriving trade networks connecting dozens of species, and technological marvels that dwarfed anything in Council territory. Humanity had not just survived their departure from Council space. They had flourished beyond imagination in a civilization that recognized and nurtured their potential. Admiral Nixvara delivered the closing statement for what everyone knew would be the final council session. They had possessed the greatest species in galactic history as partners and had treated them as servants. Now those partners had found civilizations that valued them as equals and had moved so far beyond their former associates that contact seemed not just impossible but pointless. The Council had not lost humanity through war or disaster. They had thrown away the key to their own future through fear, prejudice, and the inability to recognize true partnership when it was offered to them. The massive chamber on Centauri Prime buzzed with voices from 800 different species. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood at the human podium, his hands folded behind his back as he watched the vote counter climb higher and higher. The numbers were not in humanity's favor. The Vrex delegate, High Counselor Thexara, had spent 3 hours listing humanity's crimes against galactic peace. Her blue skin seemed to glow brighter as she spoke about human aggression, their rapid expansion across star systems, and what she called their barbaric need to fight each other even when they had plenty of space. Jake had heard it all before. Every session for the past 2 years had been the same. The council members whispered about humans being too dangerous, too unpredictable, too violent for civilized space. They pointed to Earth's history of wars, to the speed with which humans had colonized new worlds, to the way human military ships seemed to appear everywhere in the galaxy. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Brooks stood beside Jake, her face showing no emotion as the accusations continued. She had served in 3 different star systems and had seen how humans actually behaved among the aliens. But the Council did not want to hear about human peacekeeping missions or disaster relief efforts. They only saw the weapons and the soldiers. The vote was called at exactly 1400 hours Centauri time. The motion read simply, to exclude the human species from all Galactic Council activities, including trade agreements, military alliances, technological exchanges, and diplomatic relations, effective immediately. Jake watched the numbers appear on the massive display screen above the chamber. 847 species voted yes. Only 3 voted no. The Synthetic Intelligence Collective, the Nomadic Traders Guild, and surprisingly, the Ethereal Communion. Jake made a mental note to thank them later. Though he doubted there would be a later, the chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to the human delegation. This was the moment when most species would begin shouting, threatening, or pleading for reconsideration. The Corans had thrown furniture when they were censured last year. The hive mind had broadcast psychic screams that gave half the delegates headaches for weeks. Jake Morrison did none of these things. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single data pad. He began typing with calm, steady fingers while 800 alien species watched in growing confusion. Amy Brooks stepped closer and whispered something in his ear, but Jake just nodded and continued typing. After 5 minutes, Jake stood up. The chamber was so quiet that the hum of the translation matrix seemed loud. He looked around the vast room, making eye contact with delegates he had worked with for over a decade. Some looked ashamed. Others appeared relieved. Most just looked curious about what the humans would do next. The human delegation acknowledges the Council's decision, Jake said into his microphone. His voice carried clearly through the translation system, reaching every corner of the chamber. We will comply immediately. That was it. No speeches about injustice, no threats about consequences. No dramatic declarations about how the Council would regret this decision. Jake Morrison simply gathered his papers, closed his briefcase, and walked toward the exit. Amy Brooks followed, along with the rest of the human delegation. 23 humans who had dedicated their careers to building relationships with alien species walked out of the Galactic Council for the last time. Their footsteps echoed in the silent chamber. High Counselor Thexara looked puzzled. She had expected the humans to fight back, to cause trouble, to prove her point about their aggressive nature. Instead, they had accepted the decision with more grace than most species showed when they lost a simple trade dispute outside the chamber. Jake Morrison was already making calls. Within 1 hour, every human embassy in Council space received the same message: pack everything and prepare for immediate departure. No exceptions, no delays, no requests for extensions. The speed of the human response shocked everyone. Ambassador. Stations that had operated for decades were empty within 6 hours. Human trade ships received record orders and began leaving Council space immediately. Scientific teams working on joint projects with alien species packed their research and departed without finishing their work. Dr. Patricia Kane had been working with the Aldery for 8 years on a project to improve mining efficiency in asteroid fields. She had been 3 weeks away from a major breakthrough that could have revolutionized resource extraction across the galaxy. When the recall order came, she simply transferred all her research files to the Aldery team leader and wished him good luck. Captain Roy Fisher commanded a human medical ship that had been providing aid to refugees in the Outer Rim for 2 years. His ship was in the middle of treating victims of a plague outbreak when the order came. He stayed long enough to stabilize the critical patients and train the replacement medical team, then departed for human space. The efficiency was remarkable. Humans had apparently prepared contingency plans for exactly this situation. Every embassy had evacuation procedures ready. Every trade ship knew which routes to take home. Every scientific mission had data backup protocols that could be executed in hours. Within 12 hours of the Council vote, humanity had withdrawn from every joint project in Council space. The archaeological survey of ancient ruins on Kelsar was abandoned, leaving alien scientists to figure out human excavation techniques on their own. The Deep Space Communication Network lost its human-designed signal boosters, causing immediate degradation in long-range transmissions. The Cultural Exchange Program, which had allowed young humans to study with alien species for over 50 years, ended overnight. Human students at universities across the galaxy packed their belongings and headed home. Alien students who had been studying on human worlds were given the choice to stay or leave, but most chose to return to their own species. By the end of the first day, it was as if humans had never been part of the Galactic Council at all. Their seats in the chamber were empty. Their voices were absent from committee meetings. Their ships no longer appeared on traffic control screens throughout Council space. The silence was complete. No messages, no attempts to negotiate, no requests for special exceptions. Humanity had simply vanished from galactic civilization as efficiently as they had once appeared. The Council had voted to exclude them, and they had accepted that exclusion. Without argument, some delegates began to feel uneasy about how smoothly everything had gone. The Mindari collective representative mentioned to his aide that the humans had seemed almost relieved by the decision. The Trader Guild ambassador wondered why the humans had not even tried to negotiate for continued trade relationships. But High Counselor Thexara felt satisfied. The dangerous humans were gone, and galactic civilization could return to the peaceful cooperation it had enjoyed before humanity arrived. The galaxy would be safer now, more stable, more civilized. She had no idea how wrong she was about to be proven. 6 months had passed since the humans left, and mining station Omega 7 was having problems. Chief Engineer Gexthal stared at the blinking red lights on his control panel with growing frustration. The deep core extraction systems that had worked perfectly for 10 years were now failing almost daily. The Aldery Mining Consortium had built their reputation on efficiency. Their automated systems could extract rare minerals from the most dangerous asteroid cores in the galaxy. But these systems had been designed with human help. And now that help was gone. Dr. Elena Martinez had been the lead human engineer on the project. She had spent 5 years working with Aldery technicians to create mining protocols that were both safe and incredibly productive. When the recall order came, she had quietly transferred all her files to Gexthal and wished him luck. Now Gexthal understood why she had looked so sad when she said goodbye. The human-designed systems were unlike anything the Aldery had seen before. Every component seemed to serve multiple purposes. Backup systems had backup systems, and those had backup systems too. The mining drones could adapt to problems that had never even happened yet. When Gexthal tried to repair a broken sensor array, he discovered that the array was also monitoring atmospheric pressure. tracking equipment wear patterns and somehow predicting when other systems might fail. He fixed the sensor, but now 3 other systems started showing error messages because they were no longer getting data they expected. The Aldari were brilliant engineers, but they thought in straight lines. Humans seemed to think in circles, and spirals and strange shapes that somehow worked better than straight lines. Every time Gexthal solved one problem, 2 more appeared. The mining efficiency dropped from 97% to 74% in just 6 months. The consortium board demanded answers, but Gexthal could only shake his head and point at the incomprehensible human code that ran everything. Similar problems were appearing all across council space. The Nerati communications network had relied on human signal processing innovations to maintain clear transmissions across vast distances. Without human technicians to maintain the equipment, signal quality was degrading rapidly. Commander Velthorn of the Communications Authority watched helplessly as long-range transmissions became fuzzy and unreliable. The human-designed signal boosters had seemed simple enough when they were installed. Just boxes that somehow made weak signals stronger and clearer, but the boxes were failing and nobody knew how to fix them. The humans had built them using principles that other species did not understand. The boosters did not just amplify signals. They somehow predicted interference patterns and adjusted automatically. Trade ships began missing scheduled arrival times because they could not receive clear navigation updates. Emergency services lost contact with remote stations. The carefully coordinated dance of galactic commerce started stumbling as communication delays grew longer and longer. The Kelser defense grid faced even worse problems. The border monitoring system that protected council space from external threats had been enhanced with human tactical algorithms. These algorithms had been designed to predict attack patterns and coordinate defensive responses across multiple star systems. General Caxwell had always been suspicious of human military technology, but he had to admit it worked incredibly well. The defense grid had not failed to detect a single unauthorized intrusion in over 8 years. Pirates, smugglers, and hostile scouts were always caught before they could cause real damage. Now the system was developing blind spots. Response times were increasing. Coordination between different defense stations was breaking down. The human algorithms had been doing far more than anyone realized, and without them, the defense grid was slowly becoming useless. But the worst crisis was happening in the Humanitarian Relief Corps. This organization brought food, medical supplies, and emergency aid to disaster areas throughout council space. 17 different species contributed ships and resources, but the entire operation had been coordinated using human logistics protocols. When the spiral plague struck 3 colonies in the Outer Rim, the relief corps tried to respond as they always had. Medical teams were dispatched, supply ships were loaded, and refugee camps were prepared. Everything should have worked perfectly. Instead, chaos erupted. Medical supplies meant for Colony 7 were delivered to Colony 9. Construction materials needed for refugee shelters ended up at a military base 2 star systems away. Food shipments sat in warehouses while hungry refugees waited in camps that had been built in the wrong locations. Captain Danny Foster commanded the relief ship Mercy's Hand. He had worked with human coordinators for over a decade and had never seen a mission fail so completely. The humans had not just contributed ships and supplies to the relief corps. They had been the invisible force that made everything work together. Human logistics officers had a gift for seeing the big picture while tracking thousands of small details. They could coordinate 17 different species with 17 different ways of thinking and somehow make them all work toward the same goal. Without that coordination, the relief corps was just a collection of well-meaning aliens getting in each other's way. The plague spread while medical teams argued about treatment protocols. Refugees died of hunger while food ships circled overhead, unable to find safe landing zones. Construction crews built shelters that alien biology could not use. Because nobody remembered to check compatibility requirements, Captain Foster filed his report with growing anger and frustration. The humans had been kicked out of the council for being too aggressive, but they had been the ones preventing real disasters like this one. Without their quiet competence, people were dying from simple organizational failures. Reports of system failures flooded into council headquarters. Mining operations slowing down. Communication networks degrading. Defense systems developing gaps. Relief operations falling apart. Every problem seemed small by itself, but together they painted a disturbing picture. Counselor Veltar of the Mindari Collective began collecting these reports and studying them carefully. The Mindari were known for their analytical abilities, and Veltar had an uncomfortable suspicion about what he was seeing. The humans had not just been members of the Galactic Council. They had been holding it together in ways that nobody had noticed or appreciated. Their departure was not just removing one species from the galaxy. It was causing the slow collapse of systems that millions of beings depended on. High Counselor Vexara dismissed these concerns when they were brought to her attention. The problems were temporary, she insisted. Other species would learn to fill the gaps left by humanity. The galaxy had existed for millions of years before humans appeared, and it would continue to exist without them, but privately she was beginning to wonder if the humans had been more important than anyone had realized. The vote to exclude them had been based on fear of their aggressive nature. Nobody had stopped to consider what services they were actually providing or how difficult those services might be to replace. As the months passed and the problems grew worse instead of better, that wondering turned into worry.